Hello, everyone. I'm going to give us a couple minutes before we get started. So we will get started in about 2 minutes. I'm going to give it one more minute to let everyone get into the webinar. And as we get started, we'll do a little bit of level setting. So we will have time at the end of the session for question and answer. So as we go through and you have any questions, please feel free to drop those into the chat and we'll make sure that we have time to grab those questions at the end of the webinar. So we will go ahead and get started. We want to make sure that we are respectful of your time. We have a good 30-minute presentation with a little bit of time left over for questions afterwards. So my name is Danielle. I will be your moderator today on our webinar. This is our 5th episode of the Growth Lab. And today we will be talking about CDP, data warehouse, data lake, and really disentangling these solutions from one another. So this webinar will be recorded and we will send the recording after this webinar wraps so that you are able to utilize this information in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked over to our two distinguished speakers. We have John French and Anne-Marie Wills here to talk to you today about our topic. And I'm going to kick this over to John. He is going to tell us a little bit more about this point of view and why this topic is so important from that C-level, top level point of view. So John, it's over to you.
John, are you on mute?
Yeah, I don't know why. Can you hear me now?
Yes. You sound great.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Anyhow, the big takeaway here for Anne-Marie and myself is to thank you for the time. Some of you returning to the webinar series. We're a little bit different this time because we're both coming from Kansas City. And we're spending some time, a couple days this week, strategizing for the second half of the year. And part of that strategy is to continue to try to become thought leaders in the industry. And frankly, it's one thing to sign a contract with Leverage Lab, which obviously we would encourage you to do. But more than that, how do you make that decision? How do you get to it? And not just Leverage Lab, any technology vendor. So the purpose of this is try to straighten out some of the confusion, misused terms, and just a lot of noise out there. And you're going to see in a few minutes that Anne-Marie has an absolutely startling statistic about the amount of platforms that were available 3 or 4 years ago and the ones that are the amount today. And is it said in the write-up is if anyone's confused about all these technology vendors, platforms, solutions, if you're confused, you're not alone. There's a lot of confusion out there. So what we'd like to do is to clear some of that up and again, to be able to put you in a position to make the right decisions based on facts and your needs rather than just hype in the marketplace. And I always bring it back to when I was in the CEO seat. I had great technology people. I'd listen to vendor presentations. I'd educate myself as much as I possibly could. But, frankly, I thought that was a hard thing. I think it was a heck of a lot easier back then. It just so much. The complexity has picked up speed and, in your layer, chat BDT or AI, and all of a sudden things become really complicated. So without much any delay, I'll hand it over to Anne-Marie. But if you walk away, our hope is you walk away with better knowledge, better ability to ask the right questions, or frankly, demand the right answers from vendors. I think you're going to be in much better shape. Anne-Marie?
Great, thank you. So Every time we have a presentation like this, we always just give a very brief background to Leverage Lab for anyone who doesn't know who we are. So we are our revenue partner to B2B and B2C media companies. Our whole thing is to drive new revenue by leveraging your rich audience data, and we bring the full solution. So we're bringing first-party data infrastructure, we're bringing first-party data-centric campaign solutions that are already preconceived for you, sales training and enablement, reporting and analytics. I mean, our whole thing is to get you into revenue fast. So let's go ahead and skip into the agenda here. First, I'd like to just sort of update you. Like John said, we've got some really interesting information about sort of the state of audience data today and all of the different technologies where your audience data lives. We're going to talk about sort of the key data management technologies that are out there. This is where we're going to talk about CDPs, data lakes, data warehouses. These are the prevailing sort of solutions out there for managing audience data. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to build your ideal house. And John's going to take us through a little bit of an analogy that we're going to use as we talk through all of these different solutions. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with some hard-hitting takeaways and a little Q&A. So just moving on, this slide, so for nerds like me who care about data, who are obsessed with marketing technology, this has been a really firm fixture. Every year I wait with bated breath to see this next year's iteration of what's called the Lumascape. This is a picture, basically a visualization of the different marketing technologies that exist in the marketplace every single year. The company Luma Partners does an amazing job with Chief Martech as their partner to go into the marketplace and really assess all the different categories of technology. Who are the players? How many brands are there now within these discrete categories of technology? And the reason it's so important for media companies is that we are marketing organizations. That is a really significant component of how we monetize. And we're monetizing an audience that's engaging with us, sometimes based solely on marketing activity. So it's really important for us to understand this landscape. So when it first started in 2011, this Lumascape, this marketing technology landscape, was tracking about 150 technologies. Let's fast forward to this year. There's 14,106 different branded technologies across a wide variety of technology categories. So what this really means to us is that as a marketing organization that has deep monetization and deep value delivery by driving engagement through different marketing channels, this is like super relevant to us. Every single media organization out there is making choices about what technologies they bring into their house in order to drive value for the marketing partners that they have in their advertisers. So if we skip down to the next slide, over the years, Leverage Lab, we're deeply entrenched in working with customer data, your audience data. And so we are building first-party data infrastructure. We come in contact with a lot of different technologies. We've sort of built our own Lumascape for the media and publishing industry. This probably isn't exhaustive because it's hard to keep up to date because we're always encountering new things. But if you think about a media organization, you think about the different ways in which we are marketing or engaging our audiences. There's things that we're doing sort of offline or, different sort of channels in which we're engaging with people through webinars, through a CRM solution, through a subscription solution, through forums. All of those things we kind of call the offline systems. And then we've got what's happening on our website. Obviously, we need technology to help us better understand what's going on with people on our website and to resolve their identities back into the data that we're holding about them in our offline systems. So there's this marriage that happens. There's audience activation. There's different ways that data is moving in and out of our system. So across our Lumascape, there are hundreds of technologies that really exist within the media and marketing or media and publishing sort of enterprise. So now I think sometimes it's really important for us to have a really good analogy. If anybody knows me well, they know I love a good analogy. So we're going to use one that John's going to take us through to kind of help us make sense out of all of this technology and sort of bring it together in a meaningful way. John?
Yeah, Emery, when you showed that slide of the 14,000 vendors, the first thing I thought about was think of the cottage industries that were built by consultants, just going in and explaining all this stuff to the potential customer and stuff. And it's just, I
Yeah.
saw a lot with a lot of other platforms. So the purpose of this slide is to simplify it. And I use the word demystify a lot in these webinars because especially in the C-suite or operations, it can be daunting. And how do I put my arms around this concept? What is it? And what we put together is, or my true disclosure, Anne-Marie put together, because this is the way she explained it to me as I was getting lost in the technology. She said, hold on a second. Think of your audience data or a publisher's audience data as a house. And what does that mean? Well, a house in most people's lives is the most significant asset you're going to own, and that is absolutely the truth. That the truth in publishing or any type of media, it's that audience that counts. Now, some would argue that content is tied with it, or maybe more important, content attracts. Good content attracts the audience, but the audience drives the whole bus, and how you use that is really really important. So you want the audience data in your house. You want it to be stable and the ability to grow. And that seems like a kind of a cute statement, but there's platforms out there that are not stable or maybe not totally developed, and you really need to trust your vendor and in this case partner that they have a stable platform. The flexibility to adapt, right? If you have that house and you bought it, but all of a sudden you realize, well, integration for my lifestyle, I'm not the same person, lifestyle or family size than I was when I bought this house. Well, I'm going to put an addition on it. Rather than being locked into one ecosystem that you can't enjoy that type of exposure, and then allow for renovation. And I promised this the last time I used this analogy, but renovation, you got to renovate. Like I mentioned earlier, your needs change, and that's really important when you're talking to your technologist in your company. Okay, is this a snapshot of today, or how is this going to help me 2-3 years from now as the CEO or the operations chief? Where am I going to be? And am I being locked in? And I think to me, those are the biggest takeaways here. It's not that complicated, although it is, but you don't have to make it to that level. It is your single largest asset, but most importantly, it needs to grow with you. Your audience and what you do with it and how you monetize it needs to grow with you. Otherwise, you're just taking one snapshot. Everything's great for maybe a year, and then you have to reinvent the whole thing eventually, anyways. And nobody wants to do that.
Awesome. So first and foremost, full disclosure, all of the images from this point forward are generated by generative AI. So I did ask generative AI to make this image a little less creepy, and this is as far as I could get. So, but the point that
The first innovation was truly creepy.
it was very creepy. But the point we're trying to make with this image is that the who, the people, the individuals, the humans that live within your audience are really the foundation of your audience data. It is being able to discreetly identify them across the entire ecosystem of your data that really forms that foundation. So if you think about brick by brick, building the foundation of your audience data, it's really, let's think about them as humans and as discrete individuals with unique and compelling profiles that are always changing. So if that's sort of our touchstone, our foundation, one of the key capabilities and the key technologies that helps us build that is the customer data platform, the CDP. And when the CDPs first arrived, let's say within the media and publishing space circa 2015, they were described and defined as follows. It's packaged software that creates a persistent unified customer database that's accessible to other systems. And what that enabled, again, was for us to start to really understand the who of our audience. Prior to that, we had the what are they, the where are they, all of the sort of basic fundamental knowledge of them was what we would get from sort of our print audit statement. But to be able to really understand who they are, how they engage, what their behaviors are, what they're interested in, all of those things, we had to be able to use these advanced technologies. So the other capabilities that the CDP, most of them gave us, was the ability to segment our audience. And that means to be able to create audience groups out of everything that we know about them so that we could then connect with them anywhere we wanted to activate that segment and send a marketing message to them. So that was kind of like where we started from the CDP point of view. Now, in the early days, that also implied some things from a technology perspective. It implied that all of those point solutions that you're using as a business, the however many out of the 14,106 different technologies that you're using, all of those point solutions needed to be able to connect to your CDP to inform this joint database, this combined database. It also implied mostly that we were serving marketing use cases. And in the early days, that was great because that's where we had our pain. And then, but the other sort of dirty little secret of the CDP, it's a database, it's a data technology, but reporting out of that database technology was really weak. And so these started to become pain points. These started to become problems. And so now as we're evolving that technology, or that technology starts to evolve, it's really becoming much more important to sort of manage data to assist the CDP, or to think about the CDP's role a little bit differently. A lot of organizations, it's almost rare these days for us to connect with a new prospect or a new client that doesn't have some form of customer data infrastructure that they've created themselves, a Snowflake database, some sort of data warehouse environment. When we also look at the marketplace of the CDP, it's becoming really, really critical, almost necessary to bring some of those 14,106 different technologies into a data warehouse environment before it can be absorbed into the CDP. So it's almost becoming a de facto position to have a data warehouse infrastructure in order to support the CDP. Also, when you're using a sort of data warehouse or other sort of infrastructure, you're able to support other enterprise needs, like maybe campaign reporting and other capabilities, financial reporting across the enterprise. And really fundamentally, the days of, hey, reporting can be weak, that's just not acceptable anymore. Reporting is a critical business need. So the whole foundation of the customer data platform is kind of in a state of flux and is changing. So it's really important to think about, like, what is the need and the role of the customer data platform within an infrastructure environment? So now we're going to use our next sort of house analogy here to talk about the structure. The data warehouse in this analogy is really the walls. It's the way that we've constructed the mechanicals, the way that this house is structured in a way that it can hold up its roof, that it can stand on its foundation, and that it can provide immediate value to your lifestyle. So the way that the data warehouse environment is defined, it is a type of data management system that is enabling support for business intelligence activities. This is really key, because it implies that the data is readily available for you. It is structured, it is connected, there's a well-defined plan for how that data fits together, and it's ready to go. It's ready for analytics. We call this having structured data. So structured data is exactly what it sounds like. It's maintained in a highly organized way. Think tables, think fields, think columns. This is the way that we structure data. And then the other real requirements and I guess the value proposition of having a structured data environment where all of your data is available to you in some way, shape, or form is that that's necessary for traditional AI. And what I mean by traditional AI is machine learning algorithms and things of that nature. They really require structured data, as does sort of generative AI. So the structure of your data is critical to taking advantage of all of these advanced capabilities, but we have to have that data structured in a way that really fits our lifestyle. And by lifestyle, we mean our business. So when we think about the structure, the data warehouse, this little diagram on the right kind of tells the story in a simple way. You know, we're essentially taking data from different sources. We're pulling it into a data warehouse environment where we have tools and software. We have our tool belt, as it were, to create the structure of that data so that we can then use it for reporting, analytics, data mining, other exercises like AI. And so this data warehouse structure is not something that it isn't just solved by dumping the data into a data warehouse. There's work that has to be done in order to create the structure that's necessary for all of those use cases that we want to solve. So as we're thinking about data warehouses, there's questions to be asked. Is it cloud? Do we do this work in a cloud environment like pardon me, like AWS, like Snowflake, like Azure, Google BigQuery? Do we do it in a Microsoft environment? All of those questions, really important questions. And then there's how do we build the rooms and the walls, the way that our building flows, our house flows to fit our lifestyle. Those are the tables and the keys and the ways that we tie this data together. There's also a lot that you need to think about in terms of security systems. Like the best security system that you would put into your house, you would also put into your audience data house. And then also materials matter. Those cheap 2x4s might not necessarily be what we would choose when we think about constructing our house. And then lastly, it's like that, what's in your tool belt? What are we using to create all of the structure? Sorry, John, did I step on you?
Yeah, no, you mentioned security, and which is obviously vitally important. And the more I get into it, the more I realize that the vendor supplier has to go through their ISO. They have to, all that stuff and qualifications. It's really important. However, I couldn't let the slide go by without being curious. If you look at Snowflake, they've been in the press quite a bit the last couple of weeks even. And it looked like there was a breach, a major breach. And if I understand it correctly, I think it has something to do with sign-in or access or something like that. Besides the stock cratering, which thankfully I didn't own any of that stock, but what happened?
Yeah, it's a great question. So well, first and foremost, what happened is there are bad human beings in the world who are out to exploit vulnerability wherever they can find it. The short story with Snowflake is that there was a very focused set of bad actors who found vulnerability within a Snowflake environment within a specific customer. They were able to then parlay that into accessibility to another Snowflake customer and into another, and it kind of became this cascade of breach. So, I mean, it isn't fair to place all the blame on Snowflake. It's really not the infrastructure's fault. Every infrastructure requires security settings that people put in place. And if those steps weren't taken, then, these things happen. But I think what is really important in the story of Snowflake is that Snowflake really positions themselves as a data warehouse for anybody. Anybody can spin up a data warehouse environment.
Right.
They actively say you don't really need administrators. Anybody can do this. But the fact of the matter is, if you're taking control of customer data that has personally identifiable information, you're on the hook to really control that data and secure that data. I think that's why, organizations like ours, we go through an ISO, certification process. It's very extensive, full of audit. We have a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, who is part of our team, also sets in place all of our standards, supplies us with updated, processes and training consistently. Everyone in our organization is trained for security. And that's what everybody who owns a data warehouse environment where customer data lives should be doing. And I don't think that was necessarily the case when it came to Snowflake.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So now this is my favorite picture of all of the generative AI solution pictures. It's really, we're talking about data lakes now. And in our way of thinking, a data lake is kind of like the garage or the attic or the basement or wherever you would put things that you want to keep that are important to you. You may not have a use for them right now, but that there's value there. You want to maintain them. Maybe on a daily basis, you're wanting to maintain them. So a data lake environment, through our point of view, is very much about being a repository for data. You can store the data there, you can process it, but it's really about securing large amounts of data that can be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. And we can go into a lot of detail about that at another point. But it's really meant to store that data in its native format and process it in any way you need, so that it can be available to you for a future use case. So again, things that don't fit your lifestyle right now, but might later, that would be a great use case for a data lake. You can also use a data lake to gain some data warehouse efficiency. Maybe you don't need everything in your data warehouse on demand all the time, or you want to archive certain amounts of data into an environment where it's maybe less cost, or it's more cost effective, more efficient to store. Also great use case for a data lake. And I think one of the bigger ones that's being talked about today is how do we, sort of prepare ourselves for future AI use cases with data that we may not understand exactly how we're going to utilize it for an AI use case at this point in time, but we know that it can be, really keenly important in the future. So a data lake is a really great environment for something like that. So now I think kind of trying to tie it all together, we've talked about the structure, what's the foundation? How do we build those walls and put that structure in place? What do we think about, or how do we think about making space for the things that we find important but don't fit our lifestyle at this moment? But we haven't talked yet about sort of the building of it. And this is a really important piece of our analogy. The architect that you choose, the engineer that puts together the plan for your electrical and your HVAC and all of those elements, and then the people that you choose to actually hammer out the house that you're building are really a big piece of this infrastructure story. So we kind of divide it up into three categories. There's data architecture, and this is really what you would expect from the word architecture. This is all about what are we using from a technology standpoint for storage? How are we utilizing hardware that maybe lives in our cloud environment or on our on-premises environment? What's the hosting methodology? How are we thinking about encryption? All of those really key sort of things that really speak to the structure that we're creating and how does it fit the lifestyle. That's what goes into the architecture. And then the engineering is really much about sort of what are the data sources? How are we bringing them into the environment? How are we utilizing different types of storage, accessibility of that data, governance of that data? And then lastly, there's sort of the hands-on work around the actual blueprints and plans. This we refer to as the data model itself. The data model, every industry has a unique data model within, what they do. Let's talk about like airline tickets. The type of data that gets created when airline ticket data is managed in the ecosystem is very, very different than what would happen within a media and publishing space. So things like, what are the different entities that live within the data model? Are there people? Are there accounts? Are there organizations? Are there homes? What are those entities, those things that exist within the model? And then the attributes about them, what's important to know, how things get named from a naming conventions perspective, the relationships between all of this data, that's critically important. It's like the connective tissue that kind of makes your lifestyle wonderful within your home, and then the rules that exist around how that data is managed. So our last slide before we go into our takeaways, I wanted to talk a little bit about the cost implications of enterprise infrastructure. I think this is really important for people to understand, especially if you're thinking about a build versus buy sort of scenario. On the materials front, with everything is people, process, technology, right? So when we think about housing, the building our house, it's the materials, it's the expertise, and it's the maintenance of that house that really are where those cost levers lie. So on the materials side, storage typically is something that's like a monthly fee. It's based on volume. Also, computation, that's running the math, running the models, running the scoring, running the processes that need to happen in order to build to maintain this on a daily basis. That's usually either a unit-based, units of computation, or a time-based sort of factor. And then the tools and software, our tool belt, what are we using to construct our structure? There's a lot in there. There's ETL tools, extract, transform, and load. Take the data from the place, clean it up, put it into form, put it in the storage. That's ETL. There's what are we going to do from a CDP perspective? Are we going to buy a pure play solution? Are we going to buy more of what we call a composable or a lightweight solution? What are we doing for data governance? Do we need a platform for that? What are we doing for visualization, analytics, machine learning? All of this starts to add up. And all of it's really required to make the most out of your data. Expertise, who's doing the architecture, the engineering, what kind of skills do they need? Do they need to know Python, SQL? All of these elements here are, again, the expertise that's really required in order to maintain data infrastructure at a high level. And then lastly, it's the maintenance. And this was kind of what John was talking about, the renovation or making room for your lifestyle. What's the vision? For where are we going? How are we building our data so that we can take advantage of AI in all forms? What's our lifestyle going to need in the future? Are we planning to buy more media companies? Are we planning to buy more brands? What's that lifestyle kind of factor? And then the day-to-day, it's just the moving of the data, the construction of the data. So this is really, I'm going to summarize our house analogy with this last bit. So John, do you want to take us into the takeaways? I've gone over just by a minute, but hopefully we can do it quickly.
Yeah, we can do it. In terms of modern media tech stacks, it's always going to get more complex. I think it's, while we were talking about it earlier today, I think it's going to get exponentially more complex. And again, especially with the introduction of AI and things like that going forward, the technologies are complementary, not exclusive. This is a question, especially for CEOs, I think, and people in the C-suite. Do these things work together? And do I have to work hard to get my vendors together to work together? And that was one of the things that used to drive me crazy. I felt I didn't want to be a traffic cop to all my vendors. Figure out a way to work it together and be most effective. And your example of the architect and the builders who understand your business. Your business is highlighted obviously for a reason. It's not always cookie cutter. You just can't go from one media company to another. They all have a lot of it's the same, but then there's certain really important parts that are just different. Maybe a different platform. Maybe there's more events. Maybe there's more data products. It's just they have to understand that and realize that going in, and to be able to cover that, and then always plan for the future. And I mentioned it earlier. Anne-Marie just did as well. Again, what would drive me crazy is a big hoopla. We'd bring in a new platform. Everybody would be excited about it. But I don't know what it's going to mean to me 18 months from now. And the strategy that goes in behind that type of decision, I think, is absolutely critical. And real quick, the cul-de-sac, by the way, is an example that Anne-Marie created for me. And I won't go through it now, but like the light bulb went off in my head, top of my head. So now I get it. If you're in a cul-de-sac and you're looking at 3 houses, and you choose the one on the right, and if you go in the one on the right and you don't have all these tools, all you'll see is the living room, but you don't see the kitchen. You don't see whatever else is in the house. So maybe another time we'll pick up that analogy, but I think it was very, very educational. And the final thing is we talk a lot about security and all of that. I want everybody in the call to know, yes, you've seen a lot of Anne-Marie and myself working together, and we have a great time doing it and growing a company, but I have zero access to any data, and that's the way that's the way I want to just I talked to the chief security officer when I first started working with the Leverage Lab, and we got like 2 minutes into the conversation. He gently said, okay, you're not going to touch anything. So we're secure.
Dismissed by Fred, the CISO.
I was.
Danielle, do we have any questions from the audience?
All right. So before we hop into questions, just a quick note that we will have another webinar. It's always the third Thursday of each month. So next webinar will be July 25th. And we'll be talking a little bit more about this topic, kind of keep moving along that thread, data-driven profits and clean rooms and retail media networks. And so I saw a question about buy versus build, and I think we kind of brought it up at the end. So when we say buy versus build, where would you even send someone to start that process if they wanted to buy?
Right. If they wanted to buy, there's a very clear sort of discovery process that you need to go through in order to understand all of the different data sources. What are the use cases for using this data? How do we want to monitor in our world? It's, first and foremost, how do we want to monetize audience data? How do we want to power audience insights for the organization? How do we want to power audience growth in a way where we use our own data? So it starts with the discovery, it moves through to sort of a solutioning period where you're building the solution. And then there is cost associated to that. If you're thinking about a build, you're going to build it yourself. It's not unlike what you go through with building a house. You got to find an architect, got to find a builder, and got to find an engineer or a set of engineers, maybe multiple engineers, a civil engineer. I want to build my house on the side of a cliff. Probably need a civil engineer. So these are the things that you have to think about. Like I said, not unlike going through the process of building a house. And then there's plans that get drawn up. There are choices to be made. And then you are now responsible for building that house.
Perfect. Thank you. That is so helpful.
Marie, is there any case that it makes sense to build?
Well, I mean, obviously we sometimes hear, like we want to own our data. Like we want to own our data. We want to invest in our data. We want to build our own data. And I think one of the things that's kind of a misnomer is that regardless of, even if you go with an organization like someone like Leverage Lab, we're building your data infrastructure for you.
Right.
We are just leveraging all of our blueprints, our plans, all of our builders, our engineers, our architects to do that for you. We have had conversations with customers and customers, that are really near and dear to us that, there might be a place where they want to kind of take it in-house, take it from Leverage Labs infrastructure and put it in their own. Absolutely. That is doable. It just implies that you have in place all the tools in the toolkit that we're using, and the builder, the architect, the engineer are there in your organization. So it really depends on sort of where you are organizationally. And let's say you got all those tools and capabilities, you're ready to go, then yeah, by all means, that's a project somebody should undertake. If you don't, but you want to get the benefits of it, that's where a buy scenario probably makes more sense.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
One final question for you, Anne Marie. So CDP, data lake, data warehouse. So after we've learned about this, they're not the same thing. But can they work together? Can you use a data lake and a data warehouse within a CPG?
Yeah, it happens all the time. So the CDP is, again, it's stringing together what happens online and offline. So it's a really critical element to sort of bring together that robust profile. But there's different ways to think about that. We even have customers that we're working with today where the organization is large. It has a vast number of marketers who are looking for a lot of hands-on technology. There's a choice to be made there that would be different than an organization who has a smaller sort of marketing team. They want to work in their own technology platforms, like the 14,106 technologies. They want to work in those platforms. There's a different choice to be made there. So again, it goes back to building for your lifestyle. And organizational need is like top of the list when it comes to lifestyle.
Perfect. Well, thank you, John and Anne Marie. We really appreciated your insightful discussion and helped us to understand this alphabet soup that sometimes gets thrown around. So as a quick note, we'll send out a survey right after this webinar. If you could let us know what you like, what you want to hear from us in our following episodes, we'd love that. And then join us next month on Thursday, July 25th for our next webinar. And we will get this webinar recording sent out to you once you're out.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.